At 12:05 a.m. on May 2nd, 2026, my career died in a silent cockpit at Dallas Fort Worth International. I was Captain Marcus Thorne, a pilot with 20 years of perfect flights, but tonight the silence isn't peaceful. It's permanent. My landing gear locked into the concrete, the engine spooled down, and the passengers cheered, completely unaware that I had just committed the final, irreversible error that would ensure I never take to the skies again. The engines, and realized I just piloted the final flight for a company that wants to find budget travel in America. The lights on the instrument panel flickered as the ground power unit connected, but they didn't look the same. They looked like ghosts. I didn't know it then, but 17,000 people were effectively out of a job the moment I pulled that parking brake. If you've ever wondered how a massive 5% share of the entire United States flight network simply evaporates overnight, you're looking at the wrong place if you look at the pilots. You have to look at the fuel line. A plane can fly on one engine for a while, but eventually you either run out of fuel or the structural damage just catches up with you. We ran out of both. When I started my shift, the world felt like it was holding its breath. The conflict in the Middle East had turned the Strait of Hormuz into a bottleneck, and oil tankers were backing up like cars in a rush hour traffic jam. For a low cost carrier like ours, fuel isn't just an expense, it is the blood of the entire business model. We built our whole strategy on the assumption that jet fuel would hover around $2.24 per gallon. That was the promise. That was the math. But by the end of April, the market didn't care about our spreadsheets. Prices spiked to $4.51 per gallon. I'm a pilot, not a hedge fund manager, but even I could see the cliff coming. That price swing added $360 million in costs that we simply didn't have sitting in the bank. We were flying routes that were bleeding money every single second the wheels were off the ground. It's a bitter pill to swallow when you realize you're burning money just to keep the wings level. And yet, the irony is that we were the only ones keeping prices low for the families heading to Orlando or the college kids trying to get home for the summer. You take us out of the sky, and those ticket prices don't just stay the same, they skyrocket. People think the end of an airline is just a few headlines and a messy weekend at the airport. It isn't. It's the total erasure of a company's identity. On Friday, the board of directors tried to throw a life raft. A $500 million federal bailout was on the table, but the terms were brutal. The government wanted a 90% stake in the airline. Think about that. They wanted to own us completely, lock, stock, and barrel, in exchange for just enough cash to keep the lights on for another few months. The bondholders, the guys at firms like Citadel and Ares, looked at that deal and said no. They looked at the war, they looked at our history of two previous bankruptcies in 2024 and 2025, and they pulled the plug. I walked through the terminal after shutting down that final flight. It was haunting. The departure boards were already scrolling a single repetitive message about checking the website for updates. The rows of blue seats at the gate were empty, but the floor was covered in the debris of interrupted lives. Discarded coffee cups, a forgotten teddy bear, a half-read magazine. That is what a business model failure looks like in the real world. It isn't just numbers on a screen in a boardroom. It's a mother standing at a gate in Newark, clutching a boarding pass for a plane that isn't coming, wondering how she's going to explain to her kid why they aren't going to see grandma. If you're finding this story of how a Titan collapses interesting, hit subscribe. I'm pulling back the curtain on the things they don't teach you in business school, and there's plenty more to cover as we break down why the entire aviation industry is walking on eggshells right now. Now, here is where it gets truly unsettling. You might think this was just about the war. You might think that if the oil stayed cheap, we'd still be flying today. But that's a dangerous simplification. The truth is, our model was already in the crosshairs long before the first missile was fired near the Strait of Hormuz. We were pioneers once. We made flying accessible for everyone. But the legacy carriers, the big guys, slowly suffocated us by stripping down their own products, creating basic economy tiers, and using loyalty programs that we just couldn't compete with. We were the discount store trying to survive in a market where the luxury brands started selling off the bargain bin. The fatal blow wasn't the war. The war was just the match that lit the fuse. The real damage was done when the federal government blocked our merger with JetBlue back in 2024. That $3.8 billion deal was our exit strategy. It was our only hope of scaling up to compete with the giants. When that judge slammed the gavel, the clock started ticking. We were an island and the tide was coming in. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy went on the news yesterday and blamed our management. He called us a failed model. And maybe he's right. But when the government is the one deciding which airlines live and which ones die through mergers and bailouts, you have to ask yourself, is this a functioning market or is it a controlled demolition? We were the canary in the coal mine for the entire economy. Look at the supply chains. Look at the energy costs. When a company that accounts for 5% of all United States flights can vanish over a single Friday night, It's a warning. I've got friends who have been with this company for 25 years. They aren't just employees, they are family. They gave their best years to a brand, and in the span of a few hours, their email access was cut off, their badges stopped working, and their retirement plans became the subject of a federal bankruptcy court hearing. It's not just an isolated corporate failure. It's a symptom of a world that is becoming increasingly volatile, where global geopolitics can destroy a domestic business before the sun even comes up. If you can't predict your fuel costs, you can't run an airline. If you can't run an airline, you can't move a nation. I sat in my car in the employee parking lot for a long time that night. I watched the airport lights, thinking about the 17,000 of us who are now part of the history books. United, Delta, Southwest, Frontier. They're all offering rescue fares to the passengers we left stranded. They're even dangling job interviews for us. It's a kind gesture, I guess. But it doesn't change the fact that the landscape of American travel has just fundamentally changed. The cheap, accessible travel we all took for granted, that era is ending. When you lose the primary competitor that keeps the big guys honest, the only direction for prices to go is up. I'm going to miss the cockpit. I'm going to miss the view from 30,000 feet. But more than that, I'm going to miss the idea that anyone can fly. That's the real cost of this collapse. Not the bondholders, not the shareholders, and not the politicians. It's the loss of the freedom of the skies for the person who saved up for 6 months just to afford a seat in the back of my plane. So there you have it. The end of a journey that started 20 years ago, and a glimpse into why the next few years might be a lot more turbulent for all of us than we're willing to admit. If you got something out of this, share it with someone who needs to see the reality behind the headlines. Subscribe if you want to keep digging into what's really happening behind the scenes of our economy. I'll be back next week with a look at how those massive fuel price spikes are starting to bleed into your grocery bill, too. Hang in there. Things are changing fast, and staying informed is the only way to keep your head above water.